Can the brand new Nikon ZR actually stand toe-to-toe with a RED cinema camera? This is the question that I ultimately wanted to get to the bottom of. Now, not too long ago, I got a chance to spend a little bit of time with the ZR, and if you haven't checked out my full review, I'll have that linked down below in the description. But one question that I really had about this new camera was, how does it stand up with other RED cinema cameras? I am a RED shooter. I've been shooting on REDs for a few years now. I own the RED V Raptor X. I've shot with the RED Raptor, the Komodo X, and even, yes, the OG Komodo, because this was my entry level into the world of RED, primarily because at the time, the price point of $6,000 was unbelievable to get your hands on a RED. But now you can get RED color science out of the ZR for just over $2,000. So when I had a little bit of time with these cameras, I definitely wanted to shoot them side by side to see how the camera stacked up. Because I think for a lot of people, the question of getting into the RED ecosystem isn't so much a matter of if they want to do it, but can they afford to do it? And now at this new price point, the question becomes, well, which way should I go? So let's go ahead and hop into what's the differences between these two cameras, what is the best camera for you to pick up, and how does the ZR actually stand up against other RED cinema cameras? Now, at first glance, these cameras are nothing alike. In fact, they actually don't even seem to be within the same family. I mean, looking at just the sensors alone, when you're looking at the OG Komodo, you're looking at a super 35mm sensor that is a global sensor, and this thing has 16-bit RAW. That compared to the ZR, which is a full-frame sensor, it is a partially stacked sensor, so while no, it's not global shutter, which means it is still a rolling shutter, it has been incredibly improved than a traditional rolling shutter because of that partial stack, but you are also only going to be able to get 12-bit RAW out of this camera. Now, one thing that they do have in common, well, sorta, is the fact that they both record in R3D RAW, but these are not the same. On the Komodo, you're getting true RED R3D 16-bit RAW that you're gonna find across the Komodo, Komodo X, Raptor, Raptor X, and pretty much all new cameras coming from RED going forward. However, with the Nikon ZR, you're getting a new 12-bit R3D RAW that's literally titled R3D RAW NE. I think the NE stands for Nikon Edition, but I don't know that to be sure. Now, despite that these cameras do have different sensors and different RAWs, they do both record in log 310, which is RED's most famous log-based format, and they also have built-in RED color science in order to actually work with the RED LUTs. Now, that's something that I did like, was that when I looked at the images side by side, they tend to match for the most part, but you can definitely see a difference in things like dynamic range and highlight roll-off, which we're gonna get to here in just a bit. Now, continuing to talk about the sensors just a little bit, there are some benefits that come with each sensor that you're gonna need to know of. First off, when you're looking at the ZR, this is that full frame sensor, and as I mentioned before, this is the same sensor that we've seen in the Z6 Mark III, which means this thing does have AI detect autofocus. Now, this is fantastic when you are trying to, lock onto somebody's eye, track them throughout the scene. And quite frankly, when I did my little test with the autofocus, it did a really, really solid job. The autofocus is very smooth, and it's kind of what you expect from a more modern day mirrorless camera. That compared to the OG Komodo, let's be very clear. The autofocus coming out of the OG Komodo is not that great. I think it's fine for things like spot focus, or maybe if you have a subject that's not moving around a lot in frame. However, if you're trying to track somebody walking in towards camera or away, that's going to make things a little bit more difficult to trust this autofocus. And that's because of one major difference between the two cameras, and that is the fact that the OG Komodo only is available and is currently still available with the Canon RF mount, which means RED, not only do they not have control over the actual mount itself, but they're also not in full control of the lenses, which means there's always going to be a slight disconnect between using Canon lenses on a Nikon camera, which is kind of weird because it's really a RED. That said, with the ZR, this is using the Z mount, and that is the only mount that you can get for this camera. However, because it's all created in-house within Nikon, the autofocus works really, really well. In fact, when I tested it, I checked it out with the brand new 24-70 lens that Nikon just announced, and that paired with the ZR made for a really good autofocusing experience. Now, when it comes to the bodies of these cameras, you can tell they are kind of built for two totally different types of shooters. First, let's take the ZR, for example. The ZR is designed to be a completely self-contained unit. I mean, it has a massive 4-inch screen on the back that swivels around. It can take a battery directly inside the camera itself, including memory. It also has everything you need to get functional right out of the box. And while yes, you may want to rig this camera up, because of its design, it's not really built to rig easily. Now, I'm sure that we're gonna see brands like Condor Blue or Small Rig come out with rigs for this camera in order to enhance the usability of this camera, but out of the box, it's not really designed to be rigged. I mean, there's no threads on the actual camera itself, and there's really nothing to actually attach to the camera. That compared to the OG Komodo, this thing was built to be rigged. First off, it comes in that amazing cube size, which for me, I like the cube design because it gives you a more ergonomic device to be rigged. On top of that, there are threads on the actual camera itself, but there are some limitations when you have a camera like this that was originally designed to be rigged. First off, we gotta talk about the batteries on this thing. This thing is supposed to work with the older Canon batteries for their older cinema cameras. We're not talking about batteries for like the C50 or the C70 even. We're talking their older cinema cameras. And so because of that reason, you're probably gonna wanna add a attachment on the back. Now what you can see here is this OG Komodo that actually has an attachment that goes into the actual battery plate that allows you to adapt V-mount batteries to it, which personally, this is probably gonna be the best way to go with the camera like this. You can also see that I actually have a tilted cage pretty much all around it because as I mentioned before, this camera is designed to be rigged. Yes, it does technically have a top monitor on it. However, I've never really found that monitor to be the most usable thing. In a pinch, it can definitely get you by, but you're definitely gonna wanna add a monitor to this. Speaking of monitors, let's talk about how these two things connect to monitors. On this camera, you're gonna find a SDI cable, which is a professional standard used for cinema cameras and has been used for cinema cameras for years. That compared to the ZR, it uses a micro HDMI port. Now, I know this micro HDMI port has been love or hate. Some people don't care about it and think that it's perfectly fine. I, on the other hand, think that I would prefer a full-size HDMI. Main reason being is that with cameras for me in the past, I have found that micro HDMI ports have tended to go out over time. Now, granted, that's a manufacturing issue, so I have a little bit of lost trust in that particular HDMI port, but I'm hoping the ZR doesn't succumb to these same issues. A couple other differences you should definitely keep in mind is the memory cards. Now, with the ZR, this is gonna use the CF Express Type B cards. However, if you are looking at the OG Komodo, what you're gonna find is that this camera actually uses a slightly older version of a CF card, and this is the original CF card. Now, this card here does tend to be a little bit more expensive, in my opinion, than CF Express Type B. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on what brands you're choosing to go with, but at least when I was buying these cards, they were much harder to find and they were a bit more expensive. Now, the nice thing about both of these cards is that they do write fairly fast, so they can definitely keep up with the demands of these cameras, especially because with each of these cameras, my recommendation is going to be to shoot them in that R3D RAW. Speaking of the R3D RAW, let's talk a little bit about the workflow of these cameras because it is going to differ. Now, if you are someone who is considering shooting with other RED cameras, I will tell you right off the bat that the OG Komodo is going to slot in right well. If you're shooting on a Raptor or a Komodo X, this camera is pretty much gonna fit in like nothing ever changed. When it comes to the image quality, when it comes to the actual compression ratios of the RAW, when it comes to the color science, it's slightly different than the others, but not more than you can just fix in post. And I've got to say that when it comes to where that version of R3D RAW works, whether you're using Premiere or DaVinci or Final Cut, or you're doing it directly inside of Red Cine X, everything that this camera does is going to match up almost perfectly with all the other Reds in the lineup. That said, the ZR is different. The ZR, like I said before, does shoot in R3D, but it's in E. And currently, at the time of recording this video, that's not supported in DaVinci Resolve, it's not supported in Premiere, and it's also not supported in Final Cut. And because this version of RAW, to me, looks like a slight variant or slight flavoring of Nikon's RAW, Nikon's RAW isn't even supported in all editors. For example, it's currently not supported in Final Cut. So if you are someone who has built in a workflow with Final Cut, though I'm a little bit hesitant to if we're gonna see this R3D NE variant work inside of an editor like Final Cut. But if you use DaVinci, I've been told that that variant will work in there pretty soon. Speaking of working with other REDs, there is another major difference that I have found if you are someone who is thinking about picking up a camera to possibly work with other RED cameras. And that is the fact that the OG Komodo slots in perfectly within RED's control. So RED has a few different apps. They have the actual control app that you can use on your phone to actually monitor your camera, but you can also control it with the RED Control Pro app. And the OG Komodo works just like all the other new REDs that have come out in just about the last year or two. However, the ZR does not. And so that kind of makes it a little bit of a stepchild within its own ecosystem because you can't control that camera currently through RED Control Pro app. I personally would love to have the ZR be a part of that because one of my favorite things to do on a set with multiple REDs is literally just to connect them all to the app and be able to press a single button and have them all record, have them all stop, or even change settings to all the cameras at the same time. Currently, if I were to bring a ZR into that workflow, it would slow down the process because I would have to manually set up that camera on its own. Now, currently the only way to actually work with these files side by side is by using Red Cine. And so I booted up both of these files inside of Red Cine just to see what I'm getting and how do the Red files differ. Now, it is clear that you can see some of the difference between 12-bit and 16-bit when you start moving things around. Quite honestly, to the average eye, will you be able to really tell? Probably not. But when you start tweaking things, there are some minor differences that pop up. The only other major difference that I'm seeing between the files is the fact that when you are shooting with the traditional R3D, or the files that at least I got out of the OG Komodo, is that there is an option here on my screen that allows me to change a specific RAW format that I don't see with the ZR. The setting that I'm actually talking about is something called Output Transform. Now, this is something that I actually found really fascinating about the RED ecosystem when it comes to shooting in RAW. When you're shooting in RAW on the RED, you have the option to determine how much contrast you're actually gonna have on the sensor and what the highlight roll-off should be. Now, what's funny enough is that this is actually something you can change in post. So something that we talk a lot about when it comes to cameras, you know, how soft is the highlight roll-off or how much contrast is the sensor giving us? These are actually raw settings that you can change inside of a RED file. However, when I switch over to the Nikon ZR, which has the Nikon R3D NE variant, I don't see this as an option here. Now, I am not the most experienced when it comes to Red Cine. I actually process all of my RED files inside of my editor, but because this is the only way that I can actually see this right now is through this actual program, this is the only thing that's standing out to me. Hopefully, once we actually get some support inside of DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut, and Premiere, I'll be able to see what other limitations we have. But everything else that you would expect to be able to change inside of a RAW file is here. You can change the white balance, you can change your ISO, you can even go as far as changing your CDLs, which is actually really, really nice. And I didn't expect to actually see that on the ZR. So it is really cool to see how well they are playing together, although there are some minor differences. All right, so let's break it down. What camera is best for you and which one should you buy? Well, there's a few thoughts that I have with it. First, let's talk about the OG Komodo. To me, the OG Komodo is one of the best buys you can get if you are trying to spend as little as possible, but get a phenomenal image. There's very few cameras, as far as I'm concerned, that sit in the caliber that is the OG Komodo. I mean, next to the OG Komodo, the only other camera I can really think that is giving you this much image quality for the money is going to be something like the Pixis 12K or even the Blackmagic Cinema camera 6K. I mean, for $3,000, obviously, if you want to get the best sensor you can get, we're talking global shutter, we're talking 6K. Granted, it is Super 35, but you're getting 16-bit RAW. Quite honestly, nothing still stands up to this price point. And we gotta also remember that when this camera first came out, it was traditionally $6,000. It was only after the acquisition from Red to Nikon that we actually saw this camera get that price drop. So for the price, and if you're looking for a cinema camera that you can rig out and is designed for that feature, Well, nothing really beats this to me. The only major limitations is the fact that one, you're going to have to rig this camera out, which means while yes, it is $3,000, you can probably expect to really spend somewhere around $4,000 to $5,000 after it's all said and done. The other limitation of this camera to me, and this is sort of a big one, is the fact that it is on the RF mount. Now, Nikon has not come out and said that they will no longer be supporting the RF mount on future RED cameras, but it's gotta be hard for me to believe that Nikon as a company will continue to make new cameras in the future that also have an RF mount. It just doesn't make business sense if you're asking me personally. Now, that compared to the ZR. As far as I'm concerned, for the price, the ZR is one of the best cameras out on the market right now. I mean, the fact that you're getting a 6K full frame sensor that can shoot R3D RAW. Granted, it is a variant of R3D RAW, it's not the full version, and we don't understand quite the compression ratio that's happening on there quite yet. However, for that price point, the image is absolutely amazing. No, it is not 16-bit, and no, it is not a global shutter, but for $2,200, I mean, it's really hard for me to think of another camera that's so all-in-one that you can go out and shoot with and get that image. So if you are someone who is thinking about getting into the RED ecosystem, maybe you have your eye on a Komodo X, you have your eye on a Raptor potentially in the future, and you're thinking, should I go OG Komodo or should I go with the new ZR? For the price and for the future, it feels like the ZR might be the better buy. The only reason why at this point I would probably recommend somebody pick up the OG is because you know that it's something that you plan to rig out, you know you want that global shutter, and you need something that works with the other REDs today. And that is the big difference. I think the ZR has a lot of potential, and I think some software updates can come along and make the ZR a phenomenal camera and make it what I would believe to be the no-brainer better camera between this guy right here. But because of the fact of where the software currently sits, I still think that the ZR has a little bit of room to grow. But if I'm being honest, the thing that I would really love to see is a ZR2 or a ZR Pro that even skirts the gap even closer. That's a little bit more integrated with RED, because RED brings a lot to the table. The menus, the actual settings. Like if we could get something like what Canon is doing, where when it's in photo mode, it's on the Nikon side, but when you switch it over into video mode, you're getting RED menus, you're getting RED Control Pro connectivity, and you're getting something that feels and operates more like a RED. I think that would be the ultimate camera. Granted, it will probably cost more, but I am totally fine with that. But I will say right now, I'm really excited with what Nikon is doing. This is a great first step, but I can't wait to see what they do in the future. But if you guys are interested in learning more about this camera and maybe even how this camera stacks up against the actual Komodo X, you should check out my video on that next. And thanks so much for checking out this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.